Some people are not stuck because they know nothing about themselves. They are stuck because they do not believe what they know is enough to move. They may feel the quiet yes, the quiet no, the pull away, or the pull towards something different, but they keep waiting for something outside of them to make it official. They wait for approval, certainty, timing, reassurance, or a sign that says it is finally safe to choose. That is what permission-seeking often looks like in adulthood, not asking directly if you are allowed, but delaying your own life until it feels acceptable to someone else. Sometimes it looks like over-explaining because you are trying to make your choice easier for others to approve. Sometimes it looks like collecting opinions when what you actually want is courage. You may call this being thoughtful, careful, or realistic, and sometimes that may be true. But there is a difference between wise reflection and refusing to give your own knowing any authority. A person can spend years waiting for a green light that no one is actually responsible for giving them. They wait to rest until they feel they have earned it, and they wait to change until the timing looks clean. They wait to stop tolerating something until someone else agrees it has become too much. They wait to want what they want until they can explain it in a way everyone understands. After a while, life starts to feel like it belongs to a committee. Every desire has to be reviewed, every boundary has to be defended, and every honest feeling has to prove itself before it is allowed to matter. That is exhausting in a quiet way because it teaches a person to treat their own yes as unfinished paperwork. It teaches them to treat their own no as something that needs evidence before it can be trusted. So even when the answer is clear enough, they keep searching for more confirmation. They are not searching because they know nothing. They are searching because they do not trust themselves to be the final signer. That is often where the real pain lives, not in confusion, but in outsourced authority. Somewhere along the way, a person learned that their own experience was not enough. Maybe they were questioned too much, corrected too quickly, or told they were too sensitive, too dramatic, too difficult, or too unrealistic. Maybe love felt easier when they were agreeable, and maybe safety depended on reading the room before trusting their own response. So they learned to look outward before moving inward. They learned to ask whether something would upset anyone before asking whether it was honest. They learned to ask if they could defend a choice before asking whether they knew it was true. They learned to make their inner life presentable before allowing it to become real. That habit can follow someone for a long time, even when they are grown and no one is technically stopping them. The old permission system can move inside them until they become the one delaying themselves. They become the one saying not yet, not until you are sure, not until you can explain it better, not until no one misunderstands you. But there may never be a version of your life that everyone understands. There may never be a decision that carries no discomfort, no tension, and no emotional cost. There may never be a choice that arrives with perfect certainty and total approval. If that is the standard, your life will keep waiting. This does not mean you should be careless, ignore consequences, or act on every impulse. It means there is a point where reflection has to become ownership. There is a point where gathering more information becomes avoidance. There is a point where asking for advice becomes a way of delaying your own responsibility. Because if someone else gives you permission, the decision feels less lonely. It feels like you are not fully standing alone inside it. But adulthood eventually asks for something more difficult, which is standing inside your own life without needing everyone else to co-sign your honesty. That can feel uncomfortable if you are used to being understood before you move. It can feel uncomfortable if you are used to being approved of before you trust yourself. It can feel uncomfortable if your nervous system still believes disagreement means danger. But disagreement is not always danger, and discomfort is not always a warning. Someone else not understanding your choice does not automatically mean your choice is wrong. Sometimes it only means your life is becoming less convenient for the version of you they expected. A real choice reveals preference, and a real boundary reveals priority. A real change reveals that you are no longer willing to remain exactly where people last understood you. So permission-seeking becomes a way to stay covered. If everyone agrees, You do not have to feel the full weight of your own authorship. If someone else approves, you do not have to feel quite as responsible for wanting what you want. But your life cannot become truly yours if it always has to be made acceptable first. At some point, your own recognition has to matter. Not because you are always right, and not because you never need guidance, but because you cannot build a life from a place that constantly distrusts your own experience. There is a kind of self-abandonment that looks reasonable from the outside. It may look like patience, humility, or being open-minded. But underneath, a person may be asking everyone except themselves for the right to exist honestly. That is not humility, it is learned self-doubt. Learned self-doubt does not change by forcing confidence. It changes when you begin giving your own experience more legal standing. You start small by letting a preference count before it becomes urgent. You let tiredness count before it becomes collapse. You let discomfort count before it becomes resentment. You let a quiet no count before it has to turn into anger. That is how self-permission returns, not in one dramatic declaration, but in small acts of believing yourself sooner. You do not have to wait until your body is screaming to admit something is too much. You do not have to wait until you are completely drained to rest. You do not have to wait until a situation becomes unbearable to make a change. You do not have to wait until everyone understands you to take your own life seriously. Some people are not waiting for permission from one specific person, they are waiting for permission from an imagined audience. They are trying to make a decision no one could criticize, a boundary no one could take personally, and a path no one could question. But that life does not exist. Chasing it can make your real life smaller. You begin choosing what is easiest to defend instead of what is truest to live. You begin editing your needs before they even leave your mouth. You begin treating your own future like it has to pass public review. But your life is not a courtroom. You do not need to prove every honest movement beyond all doubt. Sometimes you only need to know enough to take one step. Enough to stop pretending, enough to admit the current arrangement no longer fits, and enough to stop asking for permission to be affected by your own life. That is where the shift begins. You stop asking whether everyone will understand, and you begin asking whether you can live honestly if you keep ignoring what you know. You stop asking whether you can explain it perfectly, and you begin asking what it costs to keep betraying yourself. You stop asking whether you are allowed, and you begin asking whether you are willing to own the consequences of choosing. That is a more mature question. Self-permission is not doing whatever you want without care. Self-permission means you stop treating yourself as the last person who gets a vote. It means you can consider others without disappearing into them. It means you can be thoughtful without handing away your authority. It means you can move slowly without using slowness as a hiding place. When your own permission starts to matter, something changes in the body. You may still feel fear, but fear no longer gets to run the whole meeting. There is a quiet dignity in that. The dignity of listening to others without abandoning yourself. The dignity of being responsible without making your life a permanent apology. The dignity of moving carefully without waiting forever. That is often where a person begins to grow up inwardly, not by becoming hard or selfish, but by becoming less willing to ask the world for a signature on every inner truth. So if you keep looking for permission, ask why your own answer still feels insufficient. Ask who taught you that your no needed a witness. Ask who taught you that your yes needed approval. Ask who taught you that discomfort had to become extreme before it deserved respect. Once you see the old permission system, you can stop treating it like reality. You can begin building a slower and kinder relationship with your own authority. You may still ask for advice, take time, and think carefully, but you no longer have to confuse outside agreement with inner permission. The life that belongs to you cannot be built entirely from borrowed approval. At some point, something in you has to say this is enough for me to begin. Not perfect certainty, not universal understanding, and not total comfort. Enough honesty, enough recognition, Enough quiet knowing. Enough willingness to stop waiting for someone else to make your life feel allowed. That may be the beginning of a different kind of freedom. Not freedom from responsibility, but freedom from needing permission to be honest. Thank you, and stay calm.